Good evening again from Washington, D.C. tonight. For a country born rejecting its royal roots, the pageantry we saw in the Capitol today does not come easily or often. Knowing that somehow made the beginning of the state funeral for Ronald Reagan that much more touching, more powerful. The steps we watched late today had their roots in Lincoln's time. The planning has been going down for years, the timing down to the minute. It was a military event done with military precision, but that precision couldn't hide the soul of the day itself. The words were, as you would imagine, warm, but the words will be forgotten. The images of the day, the face of Mrs. Reagan, the sounds of horseshoes on otherwise silent city streets, the flag-draped coffin of the late president. Those images will linger for years to come. The whip begins in the Capitol. CNN's Joe Johns is there tonight. So, Joe, start us off with a headline.
Aaron, thousands and thousands of people are expected to file past the casket of Ronald Reagan in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda between now and Friday morning. They come from far and near. They are young and old. Of course, one thing a lot of people don't know, this all got off to a pretty rough start. Aaron?
Joe, thank you. We'll get the details coming up. The president will pay his respects tomorrow. Today, he's in Georgia discussing plans for Iraq with leaders of the industrialized world and the new Iraqi president. Our senior White House correspondent has the duty tonight. John King. John, a headline.
Aaron, some Middle East leaders don't like President Bush's call for them to enact democratic and other political reforms, but Iraq's new president made his international summit debut today. Not only did he promise the president democracy in Iraq, he promised the Americans would not have died in vain. Aaron?
John, thank you. In Iraq, a power play is unfolding. How serious is hard now to tell. CNN's Harris Whitbeck in Baghdad tonight. Harris, a headline.
Aaron, more than just bickering among some of Iraq's new interim leaders, some say the future of the interim government could be at stake. Others say Iraqi politicians are simply fine-tuning the art of political posturing.
Harris, thank you. And finally, President Reagan, the underdog. CNN's Jeff Greenfield has been looking into that aspect of his political life. So, Jeff, a headline.
Aaron, it was one of the President Reagan's best political assets. His smile, no. His rhetoric, no. His opponent's persistent habit of underestimating him, Aaron.
Jeff, thank you. We'll get to you and the rest shortly. Also coming up on the program from Washington tonight, more top runners are named in the Balco doping scandal, more danger to the U.S. Olympic team. State funerals are rare in American life, very rare. Tonight we look at the tradition. And in keeping with our own historical traditions, wherever we go, we'll have morning papers. All that and more in the hour ahead. We begin tonight in a city that 24 years ago, Ronald Reagan made his own, even though he always said he was just passing through. As president, he left a legacy. As president and a personality, he made his mark. Today, we're reminded of how many years have gone by and how little has changed. It was late on a hot Washington afternoon when the plane finally landed, and this ceremony, long in the planning, began. Thousands stood watching. The choreography was exquisite. There were the symbols, the riderless horse, boots backwards in the stirrups, as the procession made its way to the Capitol. There was music. Amidst the signs of pageantry more than a century old, there was also the modern. Until finally, the casket arrived on the steps of the rotunda. And ever so gently, past Mrs. Reagan to its place of honor.
Ronald Wilson Reagan had many roles to play in life: husband, father, governor. But the most notable role on the world stage was that of the 40th President of the United States of America. With his style and grace, he made it seem easy. With his compassion and sense of timing, he brought strength of character to the nation and enkindled hope in a darkened world.
Those were the words of the Reverend Daniel Kaufman, who's the chaplain of the House. He was followed to the microphone by three former colleagues of the late president.
President Abraham Lincoln was the first president to lie in state under this Capitol dome. In the coming days, thousands will come to these hallowed halls to say goodbye to another son of Illinois who, like Lincoln, appealed to our best hopes, not our worst fears.
President Reagan dared to dream that America had a special mission. He believed in the essential goodness of the American people, and that we had a special duty to promote peace and freedom for the rest of the world. Against the advice of the timid, he sent a chilling message to authoritarian governments everywhere that the civilized world would not rest until freedom reigned in every corner of the globe.
Seen now at a distance, his strengths as a man and as a leader are only more impressive. It's the nature of the city of Washington that men and women arrive, leave their mark, and go their way. Some figures who seemed quite large and important in their day are sometimes forgotten or remembered with ambivalence. Yet nearly a generation after the often impassioned debates of the Reagan years, what lingers from that time is almost all good. And this is because of the calm and kind man who stood at the center of events.
The speeches and the sermons were the exceptions to an occasion that for the most part spoke volumes without many words at all. There are very few moments when a gathering of people can be so completely filling of a space with presence and with stillness. Watching the proceedings tonight reminds us that, and of the power of such moments and what they hold for all of us. In the next 24 hours or so, thousands and thousands of people will have the opportunity to walk into their capital, into the rotunda, to look up at the fresco of the first president, contemplate the casket bearing the 40th, and in their own way, add to that stillness. And so again tonight we turn to CNN's Joe Johns. Joe, good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. U.S. Capitol Police are expecting up to 200,000 people to file past the casket of President Reagan in the United States Capitol Rotunda between now and Friday morning, around 7:30 Friday morning. That's up to 5,000 people an hour. People are going to come here, of course, from all over the country, young and old, some, in fact, so young they may not even remember who President Reagan was and what he stood for, except for what they read in the history books or what their parents tell them. But still, Authorities expect them to come. Now to the issue of the evacuation. At the very beginning of all of this, before the casket even arrived here on Capitol Hill, there was in fact a scare. We have been through 3 evacuations now on Capitol Hill since September 11th, but by some standards, this was perhaps the scariest. It happened very, very quickly. People who were inside the Capitol were suddenly told, get out now. Run toward the exits. This is not a drill. And so people did run through the building, out the doors, down the street, and suddenly it was over. Apparently what had happened, a plane in the air bringing a dignitary here to go to the service for President Reagan had apparently lost contact with the tower. They reestablished contact, and it was done. The things we're expecting over the next several days, of course, George Herbert Walker Bush is expected to show up here at the Capitol to pay his respects, as well as former Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev. Then, as you know, on Friday, the service at the United States National Cathedral. After that time, of course, the body will go back to California. Aaron?
Was it, you were around most of the day, most of the late afternoon. Was it as quiet as it seemed to us watching it?
It was extraordinarily quiet, extraordinarily still. I was at a position really right in front of the West Front Capitol. The caisson came right past me, complete silence. You did hear out on the streets and out on the television feed some applause from time to time. I heard a man shout out some kind word to Nancy Reagan, but mostly it was silence. Really extraordinary, especially for myself, a person who watched the last state funeral of a president on television when I was basically a kid. Really a remarkable scene and very patriotic as well, Aaron.
It was quite moving. Again, we've talked about this before. Our presidents in the country are the political leaders, and we have disagreements sometimes with that, but they're also the head of state, the ceremonial head of state, and we revere that, and we see the coming together of those moments in a moment like today. Joe, thank you for your work. Joe Johns up on Capitol Hill tonight. Meantime, the nation's business does go on. The president is hosting the G8 summit in Georgia. That's why he was not in Washington today. G8 plus one country in particular, Iraq. More on that, our senior White House correspondent tonight, John King.
President to president, one with a sense of disbelief.
I really never thought I'd be sitting next to an Iraqi president of a free country a year and a half ago.
It was interim Iraqi President Ghazi al-Yawar's international summit debut. He thanked Americans for their sacrifice, promised it will not be in vain.
We're determined to have a free, democratic, federal Iraq, a country that is a source of stability to the Middle East.
How to secure the new Iraq is a major challenge, and fresh from a diplomatic victory at the United Nations, President Bush suggested NATO might now take a more robust role.
We will work with our NATO friends to at least continue the role that now exists and hopefully expand it somewhat.
French President Jacques Chirac quickly took issue, and it appeared the newfound spirit of cooperation on Iraq might last less than a day.
I do not believe that it is NATO's purpose to intervene in Iraq.
Senior U.S. officials rushed to avoid a new feud. All Mr. Bush meant, they said, was perhaps a greater NATO role in training Iraqi security forces, not major new troop commitments.
While it is true that there may be some small numbers of additional foreign forces for this or that specialized role, the real key is for the Iraqis themselves to be capable of taking on these tasks.
In office just a week, the new Iraqi leader took a lead role as G8 leaders called for democratic reforms across the Middle East. The summit's Mideast initiative urges new dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians, but it also says regional conflicts must not be an obstacle for reforms. That statement reflects the White House view that some Arab nations refuse to even consider reform until the United States pushes Israel to make peace.
Without reform in the Middle East, you're going to continue to have the ideologies of hatred coming out of that region that fueled September 11th.
Missing from the picture were U.S. allies Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Proof the initiative remains a tough sell. By all accounts, the summit's spirit was one of cooperation. And the summit wraps up here tomorrow. The president's final event, a news conference here in Savannah, then back to Washington. Aaron, he will head directly to the Capitol to pay respects to President Reagan, then some private time. Mr. Bush and First Lady Laura Bush will meet with Nancy Reagan at Blair House tomorrow night. Friday morning, the president delivers a eulogy at the National Cathedral. Aides say he has been working on it between meetings here in Georgia at the G8 summit. They expect it to run about 10 to 12 minutes.
On balance, did they feel their work there was successful?
They believe they've taken some steps. The Middle East Initiative is quite controversial. It will take some time to see whether the Middle Eastern nations, the Arab nations, move, and the White House knows they won't move until it proves it's going to try to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. They were very encouraged by the first public summit international appearance tonight by the interim Iraqi president. They believe he said exactly the right thing for the American people who might not have supported this war.
John, thank you. There are a few people who can win a battle with a helicopter, but I think you just did. Thank you very much. John King, our senior White House correspondent, ahead on the program tonight. United Nations may have agreed on the future of Iraq, but there are still enormous issues to be decided by the Iraqis themselves. We'll look at one coming up. These people are here tonight to say goodbye to a man that the experts said would never be governor, much less president, Jeff Greenfield, on how Ronald Reagan consistently defied the conventional wisdom. From New York, a special edition of Newsnight.
Rain-X Car Wax not only shines your car, it protects it from Mother Nature. In fact, there's nothing Mother Nature can do to harm it. Well, almost nothing. Rain-X repels rain, dirt, and absorbs UV rays. Rain-X, protection you can see.
So many different people, so many different needs, yet they're all hoping for their piece of the American dream. Who's there to watch out for their best interests, to work with Congress on homeowners' rights, to give everyone the same opportunity to own a home? To serve everybody would take a small army, wouldn't it? The National Association of Realtors has 1 million members, and we're doing everything in our power to help all Americans realize their dream.
Stay a weekend and receive a special gift when you book at Westin.com. The best rates, guaranteed.
CNN Tomorrow's Secretary of State Colin Powell remembers President Ronald Reagan, plus Tim Russert on President Reagan and more. Only on Larry King Live, CNN Tomorrow, 9 Eastern.
Think you can't get high-speed internet at your house? Think again. Directway is high-speed internet by satellite. It's super fast, instant internet access available anywhere in the continental U.S. All you need is a clear view of the southern sky. Directway means faster connections, faster surf speeds, faster everything. And it won't tie up your phone line. Sound good? Flip to channel 227 and I'll tell you all about the high-speed internet option you've been missing. It's a no-brainer. Channel 227. The faster, the better.
You've reached Jack Conrad. I'm out of town. If you need to reach me this week, London. So leave a message and...
It's one of the biggest sewage disasters. It was the worst disease outbreak since the plague, until one man's invention saved a city in crisis. Sewers of London, Sunday at 9 on the National Geographic Channel. Channel 276.
Top questions, asked and answered. Call us on now. CNN Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Even in the pomp and ceremony of a state funeral, the most telling moments are always intensely personal. Remember JFK's? So it was today when Nancy Reagan once again stood to say goodbye to her husband, and Michael Reagan bid farewell to his father. A picture worth a second look. From the start of his political career, almost to the summit of it, Ronald Reagan faced a cottage industry of doubters. not over his ideas, right or wrong, for that would imply taking him seriously, which an awful lot of academics and journalists and professional politicians did not do. Certainly not to start. Again, CNN's Jeff Creedfield.
In 1966, when Ronald Reagan beat a moderate Republican to win a primary race for governor, the campaign of Democratic Governor Pat Brown was ecstatic. How could their guy, who'd beaten Richard Nixon's comeback bid 4 years earlier, possibly lose to an amateur, an actor at that?
Do you solemnly swear?
Reagan won the governorship of California by 1 million votes.
No exceptions.
In 1980, when Reagan won the GOP presidential nomination, the campaign of President Jimmy Carter was relieved. This 69-year-old right-winger, they thought, would be a far easier foe than George H.W. Bush or Senator Howard Baker. Reagan won the presidency by nearly 10 million votes and carried 44 states. When Reagan came to Washington, the insiders thought he was doomed. Look what had happened to the last outsider, Jimmy Carter. Clearly, he'd be overmatched.
I think that's just been arranged.
Reagan won re-election by one of the biggest margins in history and carried 49 states. When Reagan went ahead with plans to put intermediate-range missiles in Western Europe and triggered huge protests from the peace movement, the Soviets were sure the Western alliance would be fractured by Reagan's bellicose, aggressive moves.
Tear down this wall.
A few years later, it was the Soviet Empire that collapsed, followed by the Soviet Union itself. How to explain this constant underestimation? Well, first there was the actor thing. How could a man who once played opposite a chimpanzee be taken seriously? Beyond that, Reagan did not come from the usual political roots. He wasn't a lawyer, never worked in a legislature, and didn't talk like a conventional political figure. When he said there are simple answers to problems, not easy ones, but simple ones, he triggered skepticism, if not outright contempt, from some listeners. And sometimes, to be blunt, Reagan could say things that were just plain wrong. If he'd read something and remembered it, one aide told me years ago, you could tell him a dozen times it wasn't true, but he'd still repeat it. He sometimes confused war movies with the real thing.
It's a zero. Check.
Sometimes could not explain what was in his own tax plans.
I'm to blame.
And this encouraged his opponents to overemphasize his weakness on specifics and ignore his powerful political appeal. When Reagan first got into politics, a story began making the rounds. One studio head was supposedly saying to another, "What do you think about Ronald Reagan for governor?" And the other one replied, "No, Jimmy Stewart for governor, Ronald Reagan for his best friend." I have a hunch that Reagan laughed about that joke, Aaron, all the way to the White House.
I think he did. Stay here for a minute. We'll bring one more voice into the conversation. Haynes Johnson is both a historian with a reporter's eye and the other way around. For years, he covered Washington, wrote about it first at the Washington Star and then the Post. He's the author of more books than we can mention, but we'll mention one of them, Sleepwalking Through History, America in the Reagan Years. It is very nice to see you, sir.
Thank you, Aaron.
Why is a day like today or a week like this important to us, these state events?
We're a country that doesn't have much memory for history, strangely enough, as old as we are and so forth. And this is one that ties it together. The simplicity, the dignity, the beauty of it, watching those scenes up and down the avenue, and it reminds
We've heard over and over again about the divisions in Iraq, divisions between the Sunnis and the Shiites and the Kurds. Keeping peace among them is seen as a major challenge in the new Iraq. And today, the Kurds, non-Arab Sunni Muslims who live in the northern part of the country, became a major complication, not without warning, and in truth, not without reason. The reason stems from the resolution approved by the UN Security Council yesterday, authorizing the handover of power on the 30th of June. It's what was left out of the resolution that's caused the problem. For that, we go to CNN's Harris Whitbeck in Baghdad.
It was portrayed as a victory for Iraq, this week's United Nations vote to restore Iraqi sovereignty. But that's not the way the Kurds of Iraq see it. They make up nearly 20% of the Iraqi population. They've got 75,000 dedicated fighters. They fought side by side with U.S. forces who parachuted into Kurdistan near the start of the war. And now they have the power to derail any national Iraqi government, a power they are threatening to use. The two top Kurdish leaders, Masoud Barzani and Jalal Talabani, have written a joint letter to President Bush warning that Kurds must have virtual veto power over the new constitution. If not, say Kurdish leaders, they would, quote, have no choice but to refrain from participating in the central government and its institutions. The Kurdish leaders asked that their autonomy be written into the Security Council resolution on Iraq. But it wasn't. Shiite members of Iraq's new interim government were dead set against it. Shiites, the majority in Iraq that had been left out of power during the Saddam Hussein years, are now poised to assume it. And they're concerned about too much power being in the hands of the Kurds. But on Wednesday, the interim cabinet tried to assuage the Kurds, issuing a statement saying it would respect Kurdish demands. The interim Iraqi government announces its full commitment to this law in the interim and transitional phase, it read. The highest-ranking Kurd in the current government said he still believes a fully representative government will work.
This is going to be viable. It is necessary to take in consideration all the ethnic groups and the religious components of the Iraqi population.
In the post-war Iraq, ethnic and religious groups that had been shut out of power for decades want to make sure that will not happen again. And that is one of the biggest threats to political stability here. The Kurds aren't the only ones who had been left out of power, and now everybody seems to be trying to ensure their seat at the table. Aaron?
Well, what's complicating here is that in many ways the most powerful figure in Iraq, the Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani, who's not at any table and doesn't necessarily talk to a lot of people, has said this transitional constitution is not going to happen. And he, in some respects, can make that true.
Well, you're absolutely right, Aaron, because he is hugely influential in Iraq. Shortly after he issued a statement a couple of days ago criticizing the goings-on at the UN Security Council, a lot of his followers were out in the streets. Within a matter of hours, he had been able to garner the public support of about 5,000 of his followers who were out in the streets, very vocal in expressing their support for him. And the Shiites, of course, they've been shut out of power for decades, and now that they have a chance at taking the power in Iraq, they're going to do all they can to ensure that. So there really is a power play here, and it's really a difficult power play because both sides here seem to be able to garner a lot of popular support on the streets. The Kurds also said to me yesterday that if Sistani could put 5,000 men on the streets, they could put 75,000 men on the streets. Aaron?
Well, the Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani can put a lot of people on the streets anytime he wants to. Harris, thank you. Harris Whitbeck in Baghdad. This is not a story that is going away. A quick look around the world at some of the other things made news today. In Rome, an emotional homecoming for 3 Italians held hostage for nearly 2 months in Iraq. They were kidnapped in April while working for a U.S. security firm. A 4th Italian hostage was killed after Italy refused to withdraw its troops from the region. In Iraq, suspected insurgents attacked the main oil pipeline between Kirkuk in the north and Turkey. The attackers used a homemade explosive device which set off a fire, the fourth such attack in 3 days. And in Germany, an explosion tore through a home in Cologne, injuring 16 people, 4 of them seriously. Officials say they believe the blast was caused by a bomb. The neighborhood where the explosion occurred is predominantly Turkish. Still to come on Newsnight tonight, more world-class athletes accused of using drugs, but not accused of failing a drug test. And we'll have tomorrow's news in the morning papers. We can do that because we're in Washington, and this is Newsnight.
She's called her deepness because no woman has spent more time underwater studying marine ecosystems.
There's a symphony of life down there. But there are energy resources too, and Kerr-McGee leads the way.
With new smart technology that can float in, recover resources, then sail away. Energy our country needs.
With care our oceans deserve.
Nobody rules and respects the deep water like the explorers of Kerr-McGee.
Men don't like to shave. It hurts. What with the stinging, the redness, the pain. They'd rather do other things like light their shorts on fire or eat dirt. Easy, fellas.
And for him, Levitra works. Just look at that smile. Talk to your doctor today. Levitra. Quality when it counts.
CNN Sunday, one of the great battles of World War II. Ordinary citizens fought the Nazis against overwhelming odds.
I think it was a price worth paying for freedom.
CNN presents Warsaw Rising, Sunday 8 Eastern.
Today it became clear that the Olympic doping scandal is growing. 4 more track and field stars have been put on notice. They might not be allowed to compete in the Summer Games in Athens coming up. Among them, star sprinter Tim Montgomery. All 4 received letters from the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency notifying them of potential drug violations. Reporting for us tonight, CNN's Josie Burke.
2 years ago, Tim Montgomery set the world record in the 100 meters. This summer, he hopes to set another record at his 3rd Olympics for the U.S. team.
And a half. After the break, we'll take a look at these national ceremonies of loss and remembrance. And later, we'll see how the nation reacted to today's events, or at least how the headline writers did in morning papers. This is Newsnight.
Moneyline Roundup is brought to you by Bank of America. Higher standards.
Two lattes.
Watch this. Here you go.
Thank you.
You ready?
Yeah. Your check card.
Check now. Is it there yet? No, nothing. No?
See your check card transactions instantly with secure online banking.
Oh, there it is. Oh yeah, look at that. Yeah. Instant, huh? Weird. Link. Hey, you know what? Can you make it do that again and get me a brownie? Yeah. Okay.
Bank of America.
Yeah, thanks.
Higher standards.
Every investor wants to get ahead. Every investor has a destination. The job at Janus is getting every investor closer. Janus is delivering, pushing hard for performance, offering more investment choices. Janus is working to earn every investor's confidence, every step of the way. Get there. Janus Capital Group.
Elevate their performance. On the biggest stages, with the highest stakes, they're able to summon something extra, and by sheer will, produce wonders. As a global energy leader, expect big things from ConocoPhillips, and watch our performance elevate.
Folding this week in the Capitol, though old and venerable, also represent a turning point. When George Washington died, it took weeks for the news to spread. The country mourned in stages as the country learned of the loss. By the time Abraham Lincoln died, telegraphs and trains allowed the country to mourn the loss together. His was the first national funeral. Today, news travels in an instant. The world has long been a global village. There have been other state funerals since Lincoln, of course, but his still shapes what we saw today. Here's CNN's Tom Foreman.
No other state funeral has produced more unforgettable images than that of John Kennedy, the rolling caisson, his son saluting, the grief of a nation. Yet it was Jackie Kennedy, in her grief, who defined how a modern state funeral, how Ronald Reagan's funeral will be conducted.
She sent historians to the Library of Congress in the middle of the night to research the Lincoln funeral proceedings. And so after that, a very large report was prepared. We followed that report pretty much since 1965 when that was done.
Much of the ceremony Mrs. Kennedy revived can be traced to Lincoln. Lincoln's funeral procession was the first to feature a riderless horse, like the one that followed President Reagan. The catafalque, or decorative stand on which President Reagan's casket now rests, was built for Lincoln, the first president to lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda. It has been used for all 9 presidents who have lain in state there since, although 4 non-presidents have also been given that honor. All were military men, an unknown soldier from World War I, another representing World War II and the Korean conflict, General John Pershing and General Douglas MacArthur. Of all Americans, only about half are old enough to have seen a president lie in state at the Capitol. The last one was Lyndon Johnson in 1973. Richard Nixon died 10 years ago, but his funeral was in California. So, as he did in life, Ronald Reagan is showing America something new and at once old, the way a nation comes together to mourn, show respect, and say goodbye. Tom Foreman, CNN, Washington.